The story begins not in Washington or New York, but in a small town where life is tough and hope often feels far away. J.D. Vance didn't grow up with silver spoons or fancy schools. He came from a place where jobs were disappearing, families were breaking apart, and the future looked shaky at best. His childhood was full of chaos, moving from house to house, dealing with adults who struggled just to keep things together. But somehow, he made it out. He joined the military, got his head straight, and worked harder than most. After serving, he went to college and eventually law school at Yale. That might sound like a fairy tale ending, but for him, it was just the start of something bigger. He wrote a book about his life, not because he wanted to be famous, but because he wanted people to understand what was really going on in places like the one he came from. That book, Hillbilly Elegy, hit a nerve. People started talking about it everywhere, on TV, online, even in political circles. Suddenly, this guy who once had nothing became a voice for millions of Americans who felt forgotten. He talked about how hard it was to climb out of poverty, how broken homes hurt kids, and how the American dream wasn't working for everyone. As his fame grew, so did his opinions. He wasn't afraid to say what others wouldn't. He criticized big companies that moved jobs overseas. He questioned politicians who promised change but never delivered. And most importantly, he called out what he saw as a culture of victimhood, where people kept blaming the system instead of taking control of their own lives. At first, he was seen more as a writer and thinker than a politician, but soon he started showing up at rallies, giving speeches, and meeting leaders. His message resonated with regular folks who were tired of being ignored by both parties. He wasn't flashy or fake. He spoke like someone who had lived through real struggles. Then came the chance to run for office. Not just any office, a seat in the U.S. Senate. It was a bold move, but he jumped in head first. His campaign focused on rebuilding communities, bringing back jobs, and standing up to powerful interests that had left ordinary people behind. He won, not just because of his ideas, but because people believed he understood them. Meanwhile, across the country, another figure remained larger than life. Barack Obama had long been seen as a symbol of hope and progress. Even after leaving the White House, his words still carried weight. He gave speeches around the world, met with young leaders, and stayed active in public life. Many saw him as the opposite of everything Vance stood for, calm where Vance was fiery, idealistic where Vance was skeptical. Obama's supporters loved his vision of unity and justice. They believed in the changes he tried to make and defended his record fiercely. To them, he was more than a president. He was a movement. But times were changing. The country was more divided than ever. People weren't just looking for promises anymore. They wanted results. And Vance, with his raw honesty and outsider status, began to challenge the old ways of thinking. It wasn't personal at first. Vance rarely mentioned Obama directly. He focused on systems, policies, and cultural shifts. But as his influence grew, so did the comparisons. People started asking, was Obama's America failing the very people he claimed to help? Was Vance the new face of what America needed? Tensions simmered under the surface. Then, during a major, conservative event, Vance gave a speech that changed everything. He didn't hold back. He called out failed policies, broken promises, and what he saw as a disconnect between Washington and the real world. And in that speech, Obama's name came up not just once but multiple times. This wasn't just a critique, it was a challenge, a signal that Vance wasn't afraid to take on even the most respected figures if he believed they were part of the problem. The media picked up on it instantly. Headlines exploded. Some called it brave, others called it reckless. But one thing was clear. The gloves were coming off. And somewhere, quietly watching, Obama took note. He wasn't one to jump into every fight, but he knew when the moment was coming. This wasn't just politics as usual. This was a battle over the soul of the country, and both men would play a role in shaping its future. After his bold speech, J.D. Vance found himself at the center of a political storm. What he had said couldn't be taken back. He had challenged not just a former president, but a symbol, someone millions still looked up to as a voice of reason and hope. The response was instant. Some called him brave, others reckless. But one thing was clear. He had forced a conversation that many wanted to avoid. Back in Chicago, Obama stayed quiet at first. He wasn't known for quick comebacks or public fights. His team watched the news closely. They knew this moment would come eventually. For years, people had used Obama's name, sometimes fairly, sometimes not, to push their own agendas. Now Vance wasn't just using it. He was aiming directly at it. Inside Obama's office, meetings were tense. Advisors debated whether he should respond. Some argued silence was strength. Others believed if they didn't speak up now, Vance's message would spread unchecked. In the end, Obama made the call himself. He would address it, not with anger, but with clarity. He chose a town hall in Chicago, not a fancy event, but something close to home. Young voters would be there, the next generation of leaders. This wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about ideas, legacy, and who gets to shape the future. As preparations began, Vance's team was already working behind the scenes. They weren't surprised by Obama's decision. In fact, they had been waiting for it. To them, this wasn't just another political fight. It was a chance to prove that even the most respected figures could be held accountable. Vance's advisors dug through old records, searching for anything that showed Obama's policies falling short. They focused on jobs, health care, and trade, deals on areas where promises had been high but results mixed for many Americans. Their goal wasn't to destroy Obama's image, but to show that leadership isn't perfect, that even heroes make choices that hurt people. Then came a leak, carefully timed, perfectly placed. A memo surfaced showing internal discussions from Obama's final years in office. It suggested that some top officials had concerns about how certain economic moves might affect small towns and working-class families. But those concerns hadn't stopped the decisions from being made. The media ran with it. Headlines screamed about broken trust. Vance didn't need to say much. The documents did the talking for him. He simply appeared on TV and asked one question. If they knew then what we know now, why didn't they do better? That night, Obama stepped into the town hall. The room buzzed with energy. Supporters cheered. Critics watched closely. Cameras rolled. When he took the stage, he didn't look angry. He looked like someone ready to have a hard conversation. Reporters wasted no time. One asked about the leaked memo. Another questioned whether Obama had ignored the struggles of small-town America. He answered calmly, explaining the pressures of leadership and the limits of any one person's power. He admitted mistakes had been made, but also reminded everyone that change takes time, and progress isn't always clean or easy. Still, the questions kept coming. And outside the hall, Vance's team was already preparing the next move. Hours after the event, an exposé dropped online. It was long, detailed, and filled with stories from people who felt left behind during Obama's time in office. Factory workers who lost jobs, parents who struggled with rising costs, small business owners who felt squeezed out by big changes. The article painted a picture of a presidency that had done great things, but only for some. Vance's name was attached, not as an attacker, but as someone asking tough questions, on behalf of those who never got a voice. By morning, the headlines had shifted. Obama's team scrambled to respond. Vance appeared on national TV, calm and confident. He spoke about listening to real people, not just powerful ones. He talked about rebuilding trust, not by defending the past, but by learning from it. Obama watched from afar. He wasn't surprised. He had seen this before, the cycle of criticism, the search for truth, the battle over legacy. He knew this wouldn't be the last time his record was challenged. But he also knew something else. The country wasn't just fighting over policies. It was fighting over identity, and now both men were at the heart of it. Behind closed doors, Obama's closest allies began planning a response. They didn't want a war of insults. They wanted a chance to set the record straight, face to face. Someone suggested a debate-style interview. Obama hesitated at first. He wasn't one for showmanship, but after thinking it over, he agreed. It would be broadcast live. No filters, no spin, just two voices, two views, and a country watching closely. Vance, when offered the same opportunity, didn't hesitate. He accepted right away. To him, this was more than politics, and it was proof that no leader should be above question. If you claim to serve the people, you have to answer to them. The date was set, the cameras were ready, and the nation braced itself for what would become one of the most watched political moments in recent memory. This wasn't just a clash of ideas. It was a test of leadership, honesty, and what kind of America people wanted to build. And neither man planned to back down. The day of the town hall had passed, but the conversation it started was only getting louder. Across TV channels, online forums, and coffee shop debates, people were talking about one thing. Was Obama's vision for America still relevant? And, more importantly, was J.D. Vance right to challenge it so directly? Inside Obama's team, the mood was serious. They knew this wasn't just another political moment. This was a test, not just of policy, but of legacy. The leaked memo and the expose had done their job. Doubt had crept into places where faith used to be strong. Young voters who once looked up to Obama as a symbol of hope were now asking questions. Workers who had believed in his promises were wondering if they'd been forgotten. Obama himself stayed calm. He didn't react with anger or frustration. Instead, he asked for time. Time to reflect, time to prepare, and time to make sure whatever came next wasn't just a fight for reputation, but a chance to speak truth. Behind closed doors, his closest advisors worked fast. They weren't planning an attack, and that wasn't his style. What they wanted was clarity. They went back through old speeches, reviewed economic reports from his final years, and reached out to real people whose lives had changed under his leadership. Farmers who got loans, students who got health coverage, veterans who finally found support after years of waiting. They knew Vance wasn't wrong about everything. There were failures, there were broken promises, but there were also victories. Ones that hadn't made headlines, ones that hadn't fit the narrative of either side. Now was the time to tell those stories again. Meanwhile, Vance's camp was buzzing with energy. The leak had landed perfectly. The expose had gone viral. For them, this wasn't just politics, it was proof that no leader should be untouchable. They believed Obama had good intentions, but they also believed he missed the mark when it mattered most. To them, this was a moment of honesty, even if it hurt. Vance didn't slow down after the article dropped. If anything, he stepped on the gas. He gave interviews, appeared on talk shows, and spoke at events across the country. He framed himself not as an enemy of Obama, but as someone willing to ask the hard questions others wouldn't. He talked about jobs lost overseas, wages that never caught up, and communities left behind while cities boomed. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't blaming. He was making a case that many Americans were ready to hear. Back in Chicago, Obama made a decision. He would accept the offer for a live interview, not just to defend his record, but to explain it. He wanted people to understand what it meant to lead in difficult times. He wanted them to see the choices he faced, the pressures he dealt with, and the consequences of decisions that couldn't be undone. His team reached out to a major news network. They proposed something different, not a typical interview, but a face-to-face conversation. No studio audience, no flashy lights, just two men, a veteran journalist as moderator, and a chance to talk without interruption. When Vance got the offer, he didn't hesitate. He saw this as the perfect opportunity, not just to debate, but to show the country that ideas should be tested, not taken for granted. As word spread, excitement grew. People began marking calendars. News anchors previewed the event like it was a big game. Social media buzzed with predictions. Would Obama stay calm under pressure? Would Vance push too hard and come off as aggressive? Would anyone walk away with new understanding? Preparations kicked into high gear. Vance spent hours reviewing documents, going over facts and rehearsing how he'd respond to tough questions. His team warned him not to get personal. This wasn't about attacking Obama, it was about holding leadership accountable. Obama, on the other hand, took a quieter approach. He read letters from everyday people, he watched clips of past speeches, he met with young leaders trying to find their place in a divided country. He didn't want to win an argument. He wanted to leave people with something meaningful. The night before the interview, both men sat alone, thinking. One was younger, hungry to prove his voice mattered. The other was older, wanting to show that leadership is about more than popularity. Neither man slept much. The next morning, the set was ready. Cameras lined the room. The moderator, a respected figure known for fairness, ran through the rules one last time. No interruptions, no insults, just honest answers. When Vance walked in, he looked focused but calm. When Obama entered, the room shifted, not because of power or fame, but because of presence. He smiled, nodded, and took his seat. The lights turned on. The world watched. The first question was simple. Why now? Vance answered first. He said it was time to stop treating leaders like icons and start treating them like public servants. He said people deserved honest conversations, not carefully worded speeches. He said Obama had built a legacy, but legacies shouldn't be protected from criticism. Then Obama responded. He thanked Vance for speaking up. He agreed that leaders should be held accountable. But he also reminded everyone that leadership isn't easy, that sometimes you have to choose between bad options, that not every promise can be kept, not because of failure, but because of reality. The crowd watching at home felt the weight of the moment. The questions kept coming. About jobs, about healthcare, about trade deals that sent work overseas, about whether Obama truly understood the pain of small towns. Vance pressed hard on certain points. He brought up the memo again. He shared stories from families who struggled, despite the progress being celebrated in Washington. Obama didn't deny the pain. He acknowledged it. He admitted mistakes. But he also reminded everyone that change doesn't happen overnight. That progress is messy, uneven, and often misunderstood. Then came the turning point. A video clip was played, not from Obama's presidency, but from early 2016. In it, Vance was seen at a private event praising parts of Obama's economic plan. He called some of his efforts bold and necessary. It was a different tone from the one he used now. The room fell silent. Vance didn't panic. He explained that his views had evolved, that experience had changed his mind on some things. He stood by his current beliefs, but he didn't deny where he once stood. It was a moment that changed the dynamic. Suddenly, the image of Vance as a consistent challenger became more complex. People started questioning not just Obama, but Vance, too. Obama ended the interview with a quiet but powerful message. He said, "Well, we all change, we all grow. What matters is that we keep listening, that we keep learning, that we don't let disagreement turn into division." The screen faded to black. Across the country, reactions poured in. Some said Obama won. Others said Vance did. But most agreed on one thing. This wasn't just politics, it was a moment. And moments like this don't end with a winner or a loser. They end with a choice. For the country, and for the people watching. The interview was over, but the conversation it started was just beginning. Across the country, people were talking, not just on TV or online, but in homes, schools, and coffee shops. Some said Obama handled himself well, staying calm while facing tough questions. Others believed Vance had made his point clearly, that even the most respected leaders should be challenged, but one moment stood out more than the rest. The video clip. It showed Vance from years ago, speaking at a private event where he praised parts of Obama's economic plan. He called some decisions bold and necessary. That past version of him didn't sound like the man who now questioned those very policies. For many watching, It wasn't shocking. People changed their minds. But for others, it raised new questions. Was Vance being honest? Or was he simply saying what would help him rise? Back in Washington, Vance's team moved quickly. They knew this moment could hurt his image if left unaddressed. His message had always been about truth, about standing up for working class families, about calling out broken promises. Now some wondered if he had made promises once too. Vance didn't run from the clip. Instead, he gave an interview the next morning. He admitted that yes, his views had changed over time. He explained that life experience, meeting real people and seeing how policies played out, had shaped his thinking. He wasn't ashamed of where he came from. He was proud of who he'd become. Still, the damage was done. Donors began asking questions. Reporters dug deeper into his past. And for the first time since his rise began, Vance felt pressure not just from opponents, but from within his own circle. Meanwhile, Obama's team watched closely. They weren't celebrating. They never saw this as a win-or-lose situation. But they did notice something important. Public opinion was shifting again. Young voters who had grown skeptical after the expose were now reconsidering. Workers who felt forgotten were reminded that change takes time. Obama himself stayed quiet for a few days. He didn't jump into every debate. He let the moment breathe. He knew leadership wasn't about always being in the spotlight. Sometimes it was about knowing when to step back and let people think for themselves. Then came the op-ed. It was published in a major newspaper, titled, "Gloves Off, Hearts Open." In it, Obama wrote not about politics, but about people. He said it was good that Vance challenged him, that no leader should be above question. He admitted mistakes. He talked about hard choices and unintended consequences. But he also reminded readers that progress isn't clean or fast. He ended with a simple idea. If we only fight, we'll never move forward. If we listen, we might find a way together. The piece went viral, not because it attacked Vance, but because it surprised people. It was thoughtful, honest, human. Back in Ohio, Vance read the article carefully. He didn't respond right away. He sat with it. He knew Obama hadn't tried to shut him down. He had tried to invite a deeper conversation. But Vance wasn't backing down either. He still believed in his message. He still believed that for too long, leaders had gone unchallenged. He still believed that small-town America needed someone who understood struggle. So he did what he always did. He got back to work. He returned to the Senate floor. He focused on bills that helped workers. He met with families hit by rising costs. He spoke at town halls where people asked him hard questions, not just about Obama, but about his own plans. And slowly he rebuilt trust. His team adjusted their strategy. No more leaks. No more behind-the-scenes plays. From now on, it would be about ideas, not attacks. About solutions, not blame. At the same time, Obama kept moving forward. He launched a new initiative aimed at helping young leaders bridge political divides. He funded programs in struggling communities. He worked quietly, not for praise, but because he believed in the work. The two men didn't speak directly. There was no secret meeting, no handshake for cameras. But in their own ways, they both changed. Vance became more careful with his words. He still criticized, but now he backed it up with action. He stopped trying to prove he was different, and started proving he could make a difference. Obama, meanwhile, became more reflective. He told stories more often, not just about policies, but about people. He reminded listeners that leadership is messy, that history is complicated, and that no one gets everything right. And the country watched. Some still took sides. Some still argued over who was right and who was wrong. But others began to see something bigger, that this wasn't just a clash between two men. It was a reflection of a nation trying to figure itself out. People began asking harder questions, not just about jobs or healthcare, but about what kind of country they wanted to build. Who gets to shape the future? What do we owe each other? Can we disagree without hating each other? The debate that started with Vance's speech had turned into something much bigger. And though the heat had cooled, the impact remained. Because in the end, Democracy doesn't thrive on silence. It thrives on voices, loud, clear, and willing to be heard, even when they challenge the ones we once trusted most. The interview had ended, but its echoes were everywhere. In classrooms, teachers replayed parts of it for students to analyze. In town meetings, people brought up points made by both men. On social media, short clips went viral, not just the fiery moments, but the quiet ones too. The one where Obama said, "Leadership means making choices even when none feel perfect." The one where Vance replied, "But if we don't question those choices, how do we grow?" It wasn't a fight that ended with a winner or a loser. It was a moment that left people thinking, and for Vance it was a turning point. He had entered the spotlight as a challenger, someone willing to speak truth to power. But after the video clip surfaced of him once praising Obama's policies, he realized something. Being right didn't always mean being trusted, and trust, he knew, was what real change needed. So he slowed down. Instead of rushing into more debates or TV appearances, he focused on the work he was elected to do. He met with families who were struggling with rising costs, workers who felt passed over for new jobs, small business owners trying to keep their doors open. He listened more than he spoke. And slowly, he began to rebuild his image, not just as a critic, but as someone trying to help find solutions. His team adjusted their strategy. No more leaks, no more surprise attacks. From now on, every move would be backed by action. Every word would carry weight because it came with effort behind it. At the same time, Obama found himself in a different kind of spotlight. He hadn't gone on the attack during the interview. He hadn't tried to shut Vance down or paint him as inexperienced. Instead, he had shared his side calmly, admitted mistakes, and reminded everyone that leadership is rarely black and white. That approach won him new respect, especially among younger voters who had started questioning whether his ideas still mattered. Some of them reached out directly, asking for advice, for guidance, for clarity on what it meant to lead in a divided world. Obama responded not with speeches, but with conversations. He hosted small group talks in community centers, answered questions online, and helped fund local projects led by young leaders. He didn't try to reclaim a political stage. He tried to build bridges between generations, between beliefs, between people who thought they had nothing in common. And something unexpected happened. People who once saw Obama and Vance as enemies began seeing them as examples of something else: growth. They were two men at different stages of life with different views on how to fix the country. But both had changed. Both had been challenged. And both had chosen to respond not with anger but with action. Still, not everyone was satisfied. Some critics accused Obama of being too soft, of letting Vance walk away without enough pushback. Others said Vance hadn't done enough to explain why he had changed his mind so completely. The media kept digging, reporters asked follow-up questions. Pundits debated endlessly on TV. But the real shift was happening elsewhere, not in headlines but in homes. Families who watched the interview together talked about it long after the screen went dark. Workers who had felt ignored by politics now felt like their voices mattered. Young people who had grown tired of arguments began looking for ways to get involved, not just to win points, but to make a difference. One college student wrote online, "I used to think all politicians are the same. Now I see some actually listen. Maybe I can too." A factory worker posted, "Vance sounded like me. Obama sounded like my dad. Maybe neither has all the answers, but maybe they're both trying." Those weren't just comments. They were signs of something bigger. Because for all the noise, for all the headlines and hot takes, the real impact of the interview wasn't in who won or lost. It was in how many people felt seen. And that's when something else started to happen. Other leaders, from both sides, began stepping into harder conversations. They stopped avoiding tough topics. They started answering questions instead of dodging them. They took criticism seriously instead of dismissing it. It wasn't a sudden change. It was slow, messy, but it was real. And through it all, Vance and Obama remained focused on their own paths. Vance pushed forward on plans to support job training programs in struggling towns, He worked with lawmakers across the aisle to bring factories back home. He gave fewer speeches and held more listening sessions. Obama continued mentoring young leaders, funding community efforts, and speaking about unity, not as a dream but as a daily choice. Neither man claimed to have all the answers. Neither tried to erase the past. But both showed that leadership isn't about never changing your mind. It's about growing in a way that helps others grow too. And that's when the country started noticing something else. Not just the debate itself, but the idea that disagreement doesn't have to divide us, that even when we challenge each other, we can still care about the same future. That progress isn't about proving who's right. It's about finding better ways forward, together. Let me know when you're ready for part 6, or if you'd like this adapted into a spoken script format for YouTube or podcast use. The interview had faded from the headlines, but its impact was still growing. In the weeks that followed, people kept talking about it. Not just the words spoken, but what they meant. It wasn't just a political moment anymore. It had become something bigger, a reminder that even when we disagree, we can still listen. Vance didn't become a hero overnight, and Obama didn't suddenly return to center stage. But both men found new footing, not by changing who they were, but by showing who they could be. Back in Ohio, Vance spent more time in small towns than in Washington. He walked factory floors, sat in on school meetings, and talked with families trying to make ends meet. He stopped chasing headlines and started chasing solutions. His speeches became less about pointing fingers and more about building paths forward. His team noticed the shift. Reporters did too. Some called it maturity, others called it strategy. Either way, the message was clear. Vance wasn't just speaking for the forgotten anymore. He was learning from them. And slowly, trust began to grow again. Meanwhile, Obama stayed quiet in the spotlight but active behind the scenes. He launched a new initiative aimed at helping young leaders connect across divides. He funded local projects that brought together people from different backgrounds to solve real problems, not just policy debates, but neighborhood issues like job training, education, and community safety. He didn't do it for credit. He didn't give big speeches about it. He simply believed that leadership isn't only about standing tall, it's also about lifting others up. And people noticed. Students who once saw politics as messy and meaningless began seeing it differently. Workers who felt ignored started believing their voices mattered. Parents who had grown tired of arguments between sides started hoping their kids might find better ways to talk. Because what happened between Vance and Obama wasn't just a debate. It was proof that disagreement doesn't have to mean division. It showed that you can challenge someone's ideas without attacking their character, that you can admit mistakes without losing respect, that you can change your mind and still be trusted. And most importantly, it showed that no one has all the answers, but together, we can find better ones. Across the country, other leaders started following suit. They took questions more seriously. They admitted when they didn't know something. They worked with people who didn't always agree with them. Not everyone changed. Not every argument ended in peace. But the shift was real, slow, steady, and meaningful. Even in places where politics used to feel broken, people began asking new questions. Can we argue without hating? Can we challenge without destroying? Can we build something better together? And some of those questions came from the youngest among us, the students, the dreamers, the ones who would soon take over the reins. They watched the interview again and again. They studied how each man handled pressure. They wrote essays about it in school. They shared quotes online. They debated it with friends. But more than anything, they began thinking about what kind of leaders they wanted to be. Some saw themselves in Vance, the outsider who dared to speak up. Others saw themselves in Obama, the leader who believed in listening. And many saw themselves somewhere in between, still figuring out what they stood for. That's when the real legacy of the moment became clear. It wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about proving who was right or wrong. It was about showing that leadership is not about never being questioned. It's about how you respond when you are. Vance didn't walk away unchanged. Obama didn't either. And neither did the country. Because sometimes the most powerful moments aren't the loudest ones. Sometimes the most important changes happen quietly, in conversations, in choices, in the way we decide to treat each other after the cameras turn off. And that's exactly what happened here. A senator challenged a former president. A former president responded with calm and clarity. The world watched. And then, slowly, things began to shift. Not everything changed overnight. That's not how life works, but enough change to matter. Because in the end, this wasn't just a story about two men. It was a story about all of us, about how we lead, how we learn, and how we move forward, even when we don't agree. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of story worth telling.